Today, we're really going to dig deep into a tool. They call it QIC Assess. And it tackles this corrosion problem, but in a clever way.
The key here is that QIC Assess isn't just about reacting to corrosion after the fact. It's about getting ahead of it. And that's what we're going to be exploring today.
Right.
How do we actually understand what's going on inside the pipeline? And more importantly, how do we use that detailed knowledge to develop the right mitigation strategies for different operating conditions? Because every pipeline is different.
And it's about, as one of the videos puts it, smarter corrosion management plans.
Exactly.
So QIC Assess, this isn't something brand new, right?
And QIC Assess grew out of this real-world problem back in 1994. Pipeline operators were starting to realize that the traditional methods for predicting corrosion just weren't cutting it, weren't accurate enough. Pipelines that had corrosion prevention programs in place were still failing, often in places they weren't monitoring closely. And then they were finding severe pitting corrosion in places where they were expecting more general corrosion. And on top of that, these failures, they were happening way faster than their models were predicting. The big breakthrough was realizing how the fluids flow through the pipeline, the actual fluid dynamics, and how water films behave on the pipe wall. That was absolutely critical. Traditional models were oversimplifying it. They were treating the inside of the pipeline as this kind of homogeneous environment, which it's not. The idea behind QIC Assess was, hey, we need to bring in this understanding of fluid flow, how the water film is transported, to get a much more accurate picture of where corrosion is likely to occur.
It's not just a static soup in there. Things are moving. QIC creates what they call this corrosion hazard profile.
Think of the corrosion hazard profile as a map. It's like a detailed map of the pipeline. But instead of showing you physical locations, it shows you where the corrosion risk is highest.
Like a heat map kind of thing.
Exactly. It helps you pinpoint where water is most likely to accumulate. Because as we know, stagnant water, that's a recipe for corrosion.
So instead of just saying there's a corrosion risk, it's saying here's exactly where you need to be worried about it.
It's not just a yes or no. It's about the specifics, the details of that risk. And this allows you to be much more targeted with your mitigation efforts. By aligning mitigation strategies with this profile, operators can prioritize their efforts where they're needed most. So the CMPIC, this is where the rubber hits the road. You've got this detailed corrosion hazard profile, and the CMPIC takes that information and translates it into specific actionable guidance. What do we actually need to do to mitigate this risk? And we see this in the examples we have for the crude oil, the multi-phase gathering lines, the wet gas gathering lines. They're all a bit different, and the reports recommend different mitigation strategies based on that unique corrosion risk assessment. Flow rate is critical, and you can see this in all three QIC Assess reports. That water holdup can change significantly.
Oh, interesting. So it sounds like these CMPICs, they're not just generic advice, they're really specific to what's going on in that pipeline.
They're prioritized based on where the QIC Assess corrosion hazard profile indicates the greatest risk. It's about using your resources wisely, focusing on the most vulnerable areas.
Like smart allocation.
Exactly. QIC Assess helps operators understand how changes in their operations, like changing flow rates, can actually shift those corrosion risks so they can proactively adjust their mitigation plans.
So they can stay ahead of the game.
Absolutely.
Now, in one of the sources, they mention using sophisticated software, PipeSim, and something called three-phase mechanistic flow correlation. What's the advantage of using that kind of advanced modeling?
This is where the real power of QIC Assess comes in. When they use software like PipeSim, which incorporates advanced models like OGAS, it allows them to go beyond simpler assumptions of traditional corrosion prediction. They can create detailed simulations of how different components, gas, oil, water, interact and move within the pipeline. So they can predict with much greater accuracy where that water is going to separate out and form those corrosive films on the pipe wall.
We've looked at examples for crude oil, multi-phase, wet gas lines. Does that mean QIC Assess can be used for pretty much any type of pipeline?
Yeah, that's one of its strengths. The fact that we have these detailed assessments for this whole range of pipeline types shows how broadly applicable this methodology is. Those are very different operating conditions, very different fluid compositions. But the underlying principles, creating that hazard profile based on flow and water behavior, and then tailoring your mitigation accordingly, those principles remain the same.
How does this actually translate into benefits for the folks on the ground, the field operations teams, the chemical teams, the people actually doing the work?
Okay, so that's the crucial connection. The insights that QIC Assess generates, they're laid out in those CMPICs, and they become practical, actionable steps for those field teams. For instance, how often do they need to run pigs? What type of corrosion inhibitor do they need to use? What concentration? What's the schedule for applying MEG or those volatile imine treatments? The chemical teams get clear guidance on which corrosion inhibitors are going to be most effective against the specific corrosion risks that have been identified. So it's all about optimizing the use of chemicals, making those mitigation efforts more efficient, more cost-effective. QIC Assess has the potential to significantly reduce integrity management costs. It's because you're moving away from those generic, less targeted approaches and implementing risk-based strategies.
Oh, wow.
And at the same time, it enhances safety and reliability because you're proactively addressing those corrosion threats before they lead to failures. One of the video transcripts even mentions the potential to reduce integrity management costs by up to 60%. It's a shift from being reactive to being much more proactive, much more preventative. And it's a big step forward in integrity management.
On that note, we're going to wrap things up for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.